over to you, Will. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Yep. So happy to be here. Thank you for all coming today and having me here to speak. But as he mentioned, I'm the director of sports performance, and that really encompasses three separate programs that I kind of oversee. So the first of which is strength and conditioning, and so that's my primary goal. That's something I'm very familiar with, and I'm the head strength coach for our program. I also oversee nutrition and sports psychology as well. And so those are the three components that are kind of tied into sports performance. It's an easy way to think of that is, how physically prepared are you for sport? How are you fueling your body for sport? And then where's your mindset at going into sport? And so that's kind of how we classified those three things together. And then, like I said, I oversee nutrition and sports psych, and then I'm the lead for strength and conditioning. So today I'm going to focus a lot on strength and conditioning because that's kind of where my forte is. That's where my skill set is. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. One of the first questions that I was asked, or one of the first things I was asked to talk about is, from what I understand is you guys are, for the most part, seem to be pretty separate. Y'all may not have training camps all the time and access to a gym, a facility to train consistently year round like we do. We're very fortunate that when our kids come here, whether they're students from the US or international students, we basically have them 5 days a week, 7 days a week, really from August all the way up until May. And so there's about a 9-month, 10-month period where they're with us nonstop. We have access to them all the time, and they're able to come in and out of our gym. And I'm aware we do have a pretty large international presence in our program. So we have about 30 kids in our program every year. About 15 of them are international students, and they come from all over the world, from Canada, Spain. We have people from Great Britain, from Australia, just a very, very big pool there. And I'm aware that at the national team level, like I said, a lot of your time is spent away. You're not always centralized in that camp unless there's a major event coming up, whether that's Worlds or the Paralympics or whatever that might be. And so, it can be tough to mimic that training environment, right? And that inconsistency being in a group can be difficult to manage. And so how can you successfully train at home? How can you train when you're not with your team, when you don't have access to the best facilities? And one of the biggest things that I would say you need to focus on with training at home is, number one, we call it general physical preparedness, right? Or GPP. And all that means is you need to try to stay and be as balanced as you possibly can. And what I mean by that is, if you're at home, right, and say you were doing push-ups, right? You may not have access to equipment and you're doing push-ups. If you do push-ups, you need to do some type of pull, right? So if I'm doing a push-up, I'm going to do some type of row, some type of dumbbell row, mid-row, something like that, so that I'm working my anterior portion of my body, my chest, and then I'm working the posterior portion of my back as well. Same thing if I did like an overhead press, you want to try to do some type of pull-up or some type of vertical pull in that regard. And so just being balanced there. You also want to try to be as balanced as you possibly can, upper body and lower body. And so if you have the ability to train your lower body, your lower extremity, you need to train that just as frequently as you train your upper body, because, you may or may not think about it, but when you're playing sport, you're using your lower extremity as much as you're able to, right? So whether that's using your hips to manipulate your chair, driving your feet into your foot plate, there's a lot of different ways that you're going to recruit that musculature in sport. And so that's very helpful to make sure you're training that, again, like I said, as much as you're training your upper body, but then also just for activities of daily living, right? And so training your upper body is going to keep it functioning well. That's some of the biggest musculature in your body. And so if you're training that, it's going to help you maintain a good body weight. It's going to help you maintain good lean mass to fat-free mass in your body, because again, that's going to increase your basal metabolic rate, how many calories you're burning. And so training that is extremely important. And then also, and this is more for like core, but also I talked about it with upper extremity, is like I said, if I'm doing a push-up, that's a horizontal push. I also want to make sure I'm doing a vertical push, right? Same thing with pulling, horizontal pull, vertical pull. But then like when you train your core, you want to try to train your core in as many planes as you possibly can, right? And so for me, it's easy to think about when I'm thinking about core work, maybe doing a sit-up, right? That's just that's trunk flexion, coming up as high as I can. But you also need to think about flexion, extension, lateral flexion, lateral extension, isometric movements. So something like a plank or an anti-rotation. So movements, anti-movements, and then just hitting that in multiple planes, because, as sport is extremely dynamic, and you're going to be recruiting that musculature in a very dynamic fashion. You're going to be recruiting it in different planes at different times, isometrically contracting it, whatever that might look like, but training it in as many ways and attacking your core, upper body, lower body in as many different planes as you can is going to be extremely beneficial for you. That also applies to conditioning. So that's more of the strength end, what we just talked about. Conditioning is the same way. So, going out for a long push or a run or whatever you might do for cardio, if you're able to use a machine or whatever that might look like, doing long distances over long periods of time, that is beneficial. That's going to help with your aerobic capacity. That's going to help you maintain the intensity at which you play for 40 minutes. But again, as you know, in sport, there's also a lot of very quick bursts, right? There's an agility component to it. You've got to be able to jump and recover. You've got to be able to transition from one side of the court to the other very fast, very rapidly. And so training long distances is important. Training sprints is important as well. And then training at mid distance is also important. And so trying to, again, and agility drills, change of direction drills are extremely important as well. And so again, just thinking about that general physical preparedness we talked about, that GPP, training in as many ways as you can, trying to attack your body, upper body, lower body, and core, and conditioning in as many different facets as you can is going to help you develop overall as a player and to be a better player, and as a person to just be more healthy, more physically fit individual. And so that's the first thing I would say about training at home. The next portion of that would be and this is something that is pervasive through every program I've ever talked to, with every person I've ever talked to. You may or may not have access to the best equipment all year round, right? And so I know, that was highlighted for us when COVID hit us and affected our program, and we had to shut everything down. Everybody went home. Some of our kids had access to a gym, some of them did not. Some had equipment at home, some did not. And so I understand that that's probably the same case for you guys as well. And I would just say with that, you got to be creative with what you're doing, but also trying to keep it as simple as you can, right? And so what I mean by that is you may not have access to a gym where you can get in there and use a bench, use weights, use nice barbells, use all that kind of stuff, right? Like I said, during COVID, we didn't have access to that during our COVID shutdown. And so you got to get creative with how you're increasing the intensity of what you're doing. And so you can do that in multiple ways. So going back to my push-up example, maybe you want to do bench press, but you don't have access to a bar, weights, and a rack. Okay. But you're at the house. You just can't do that. Push-ups is a good way. It's a horizontal push. So we're training the same movement pattern as we would with a bench press. Okay. But maybe you're wanting to go heavy on bench press. Well, a push-up, you could do 50, 75 reps, whatever that would look like. You just do tons and tons of reps, right? Well, that's not training heavy. That intensity is not very high. Okay. The volume is high, but the intensity is not high. And so how can you increase that volume? One way is by adding external load. And so for us, one thing that I encouraged our kids to do was you can buy like a bag of sand here for like $3 and $4. Okay. And so basically what I encouraged them to do was buy a bag of sand, put it into a backpack, a duffel bag, something like that. And then they can put it on their back and do push-ups that way. So now we're doing weighted push-ups, and we don't necessarily have a weight. We don't have a bar, whatever that would look like. So that's a way to increase the intensity there. It's just by adding external load. Like I said, we use sand. You could use any object that you could. You could use a band. You could use whatever to increase that load there. You can also change the tempo of what you're doing. And so if, again, using a push-up, I'm doing it body weight, say I don't have access to a sandbag or some kind of weight, right? Change the tempo. So starting from the top position, you can work in eccentric. So the way that you go down, you could do a 5-second count on the way down and then come up quick. That's going to make longer time under tension. It's going to increase the intensity of the lift. You can also do a pause. So go down into the bottom quick, hold it for 5 seconds, whatever that would look like, and then come up to the top. And so there's easy ways to manipulate what you're doing to increase the intensity, even if you don't have access to a gym, weights, the right equipment that you need. And so be creative in that regard, but also be simple. It's easy, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but a lot, if you're on social media, if you're talking to people, like there's a lot of things that you'll see where somebody's doing an exercise and they're standing on like an unstable surface and they're like catching a ball while doing something else. Like, it looks really intense. It looks really, I guess appealing would be the word, but like, what are you really getting out of that? I would say that a lot of the best programs that I've ever seen in my life and the best individuals, they just do the basic, simple stuff the right way. Right. And they do it to the best of their ability and they try to execute it the best that they can. And so especially with strength and conditioning, with sport, with nutrition, keeping it simple is going to be very beneficial for you. You don't have to do all this crazy elaborate stuff to get a lot of benefit. And that kind of segues me into the next portion of what we were going to talk about is consistency, right? And so again, keeping it simple is great, but the people who do the simple things most consistent and at the best and the highest level are going to be the people that I've seen that are the most successful. And consistency is key to your development as a player. And what I mean by that is, like I said, or like we talked about earlier, you may only centralize with your team 2, 3, 4 times a year, right? For maybe a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time. I'm not sure exactly what your schedule looks like, but you're not always together. You're not training together with each other day in and day out. You may not have access to the best equipment day in and day out. However, if you only rely on developing as a player and as an individual and as a team during those times when you're together, you're really never going to progress like you should. And so, you may get a little bit better as you come to this camp. And then when you go home, you're going to regress, and then you'll get better, and then you'll regress. And so you're kind of doing this up and down wave over time, but ultimately you're kind of staying the same. It's kind of a flat line. Like we get better and then we get worse, and we get better and then we get worse. And so over the course of a year, 4 years, whatever that might look like over the course of your career, you may have had times where you had gotten better, but really throughout the longevity of your career, you stayed relatively the same or made minimal gains. Whereas, over the course of these breaks, when you guys are not centralized together, if you are very diligent in what you're doing, you're working as hard as you possibly can, you're being creative, you're keeping things simple, and you're just constantly trying to push yourself and do what you can with what you have access to, you'll make that progress at camp. Maybe you'll make a little bit more when you get home, but at the very least, you'll maintain what you made, and then you'll come up again next camp, maintain, come up again, maintain, come up again. And so the trajectory of your development as an individual over the course of time, instead of being flat, is more positive, right? And so you're going to make continual progress because at the very minimum, you're maintaining the progress you made from the previous time you guys were together. And again, the equipment that you have access to may be limited. What you're trying to do or what you're able to do at your home may be limited. But again, just trying to be as consistent as you can, always trying to train at a high level is going to, again, help you over time continue to progress. And then another portion of that consistency is you have to be self-motivated. You can't rely on your coaches to motivate you every day, your teammates to motivate you every day, because as we just mentioned, you're probably not with them every day, right? And so self-motivation is going to be the biggest portion or one of the biggest factors playing into how consistent you are. You have to, and really what you have to do is you have to sit down and you have to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. If you're a part of this team just because you like the camaraderie portion of it, or you like being a part of a team, like, okay, that's okay. And you need to work on trying to be the best teammates you can. But if you guys really want to be the best team that you can possibly be successful on the international stage, possibly make a run at the Paralympics, whatever, for a gold medal, whatever your ultimate goal is, like if that's what you're aiming at, then every single day, that is what it's got to be what's driving you. That's got to be what's making you go to the gym, what's making you get in your house and work out, what's pushing you. It's got to be that. And you have to really, as an individual, you have to work that out for yourself. And as a team, you guys have to work that out as a team to figure out really what you want to accomplish. And so just trying to really figure out what motivates you as an individual is going to be extremely beneficial and going to be what's going to keep you going. Another portion of that consistency piece is, I would ask every one of you, like, what's the alternative to not being consistent? Okay. And obviously it's being inconsistent. But what I mean by that is, you can, when you're not home, when you're not together as a team, when you're not at camp, when you don't have these good facilities and you're at home, you can make every excuse that you want to about, I don't have great equipment, I don't have a gym, I don't have space, I don't have time, I don't have whatever. Like, you can make all of these excuses. But again, like what I just talked about with identifying what your why is, what's the reason that you're doing what you're doing, what's motivating you. I can guarantee you that none of these other programs, these international programs, these national teams, they don't care that you don't have good equipment. They don't care that you don't have an optimal training environment every day. They just don't care. And they shouldn't, because that's not their problem. They should be concerned about what they're doing. Right. But again, that comes back to the self-motivation piece of that. Is like, it's not going to matter when you play these other national teams what kind of equipment you had access to. It's going to matter how hard you were training all year round before you got to that event, right? That's what's going to be the key piece that's going to determine what the outcome looks like, or how good you compete against that team. You know what I mean? Like, if I was competing against a program and they were like, well, we didn't have great equipment or a great training environment or whatever that would look like, so, we just didn't train over the break. Like I would be ecstatic about that because I would know that my team has been training regardless of where they're at. And again, like I talked about beforehand, some of the best players I've ever seen in my life are just consistent with what they're doing. Like I mentioned that we have a very international, a very heavy international presence in our program from all over the world. And those players that play for Team Australia and play for Team Canada or whatever, like they're the people that when I would get to the facility at 6 a.m., they've been there since 5 a.m. shooting, pushing their chair, doing extra stuff, like trying to get better. And when they go home to go to a camp and they come back, like they're just always motivated. They're always doing what they are, what they need to do to try to make their game better and just are consistent all the time. If there's 365 days out of a year, they train for 360 of them without a doubt. Like I have no question about that. And as a coach, I also know that if I provide them with an at-home workout, with a training plan, if I encourage them to do something, like I don't have to worry about them because I know without a shadow of a doubt that they're going to do that. They're going to push themselves. They're going to try to do exactly what I asked them to do, plus some, because they just want it that bad. They're internally motivated, they're self-motivated, and they're as consistent as they can possibly be. And so I think that's another big portion of what your training is for you and how you can be successful. And then the last thing that I really wanted to touch on were some keys to success, and I've talked about some of them already in this talk. But one of the first things is, and this kind of ties into all the other things that we've said, is you have to be selfless as a teammate. And again, when I think about people that I've worked with that have been extremely good at what they do, very good competitors, very good teammates, they're selfless. They don't worry about themselves. Like, yes, they're going to get in there and they're going to do what they need to do to get better, but they're also going to get their teammates in there. They're going to encourage them to come in there. They're going to, tell them like, hey, I'm going to come in and I'm going to work on my shots. You should do that with me. They're going to try to bring those people along. They're going to check on their teammates as well. Maybe, when we're not all together as a team, they're still going to reach out to each other and say like, man, hey, are you training? What does your training environment look like? What have you done? Blah, blah, blah. Like they're just going to hold their teammates accountable. And the reason that is so important is because, and we talked about this beforehand, but you doing what you need to do for yourself to develop is critical. But there's not one person on this call, there's not one person that I've ever worked with, there's really just not one person out there that's going to be able to win a wheelchair basketball game by themselves. If you put any one person, you could put the best player in the world. Pat Anderson from Team Canada is one of the best players in the world, right? He's been playing for a very long time. He's a very awesome high pointer. But if you put him out on the court against 5 of you guys, he can't win. He's not going to get it done. He just can't do it. If you put your best player, whoever that might be, on the court against Team USA or Team Canada or whoever, they're just not going to be able to get it done. It takes all 5 of the people on the court and everybody on the bench to win. And so you have to be selfless as a teammate and willing to invest in your teammates to make sure that you're going to get it done. And again, we've been very fortunate in our program to have a lot of success in the collegiate level, and then a lot of our players have had a lot of success in the international level as well. And that's one thread that is consistent upon all of the best players I've ever seen, is they're just selfless teammates. They just don't, it's not about them, it's about the team. And again, like I said, you're not going to win it by yourself. It takes everybody on this call for you guys to be successful. The next thing, and I definitely talked about this with at-home training, is you have to keep what you're doing simple. Again, I think there's a lot of things that you can see that are being done that they may be appealing to you, they may be attractive, they may look cool, they may whatever. But ultimately, you just have to keep it simple. You have to do what you're going to do consistently. You have to use what you have access to consistently. And if you'll do that, like we talked about earlier with the consistency portion of this, over the course of your career, over the course of a year, 4 years, whatever that looks like, you're going to make continual progress if you'll keep things simple and be consistent. You don't have to do all these elaborate things like, again, other national teams may have better equipment than you guys do. They may be able to centralize more often than you guys do. We have very good equipment compared to other teams in the collegiate division. But it's not about that. Like when we had to train at home during the COVID shutdown, I mean, we probably trained just as hard as anybody, if not harder, just because our people, we kept it simple. We were motivated, and we were trying to be as selfless as we possibly could be. And so those are really 2 big portions of that. The next thing is you have to prioritize what you're doing in your program as an individual, and then see what are those items that need immediate attention. what are the things that are critically important to you right now, and those are the things that you need to focus on with everything that you can. I think that going back to our training example, one thing that you may want to focus on, okay, is how you're shooting, your shot form, getting a ton of volume shooting up, just shooting, right? Like scoring is important to a game, right? And so that may be something that you want to work on, but with your current situation where you live, where you're staying, you may not have access to a goal. You may not have access to a ball or a court or whatever that might look like. And so if you really prioritize what you're doing, conditioning, strength training, getting your nutrition right, studying film, one of those things may be at the top level. And so instead of making excuses that you can't shoot, figure out what that high priority item is and start focusing on that, and do that every day, with every aspect of your life, and everything's going to get a lot more efficient. And so, prioritize the task at hand. What's the most important thing, and start knocking things off from there, and then work down. And a lot of that will come down to time management, just being very, very conscious of how you're managing your time, what you're doing, because, every one of us, myself included, all of the kids in our program, anybody that I've ever worked with, if you're willing to go over your life, your day, your week with a fine-tooth comb, I guarantee you can find large chunks of time that you're not, that are just it's just dead time. You're not doing anything that's productive. You may be, I don't know what you're doing. It could be a lot of things, but there's a lot of things in there that can take away from time that you could have been doing something else. And ultimately that's going to catch up to you, and it's going to take away from your development as a player. And then the last thing too is everybody on this call has got to be a leader on your team. And that kind of ties into being selfless as well, that we talked about earlier. But all of you guys have to be leaders. All of you guys have to take ownership of what you're doing as an individual on a daily basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, and just make sure you're training and being as diligent as you possibly can. But then you guys also have to be willing to invest in each other as teammates, right? And make sure and hold each other accountable for what you're doing, and check in on each other, and make sure you're working hard so that you can maintain that progress over time, right? And then when we centralize as a team, you guys are just continuing to make these huge leaps going up, and continuing to progress, and continuing to get better. And a lot of becoming a leader is going to be just defining what your why is. Like I talked about earlier, why are you doing what you're doing? What is the ultimate goal that we are trying to achieve as a team? And then if you work backwards from that, you guys are going to have to work together to make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction to accomplish the ultimate goal that we want to achieve. And so, I feel like a lot of what I talked about was not necessarily specific to strength and conditioning. We talked a lot about at-home training and GPP and stuff like that in the early portion of this call, but those are portions of it that are critical. But if you don't have these other pieces together, and you don't have them in the right place, then the training that you're doing is really not going to matter. Like I said earlier, you could be training as hard as you want to, but if you're just worried about you, and you're not being selfless, and you're not being a leader, the team's not going to progress like it should. But, I think that those are all critical portions of it. And then going back to the at-home training, where we're talking about doing what you can, training in multiple planes, making sure you're being a balanced individual, as much as you can, training upper and lower body, pushing and pulling, multiple planes, whatever that might look like. If you can combine all of these things together, you're going to progress. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get better as a team. You guys are going to compete harder. Like, it's just going to be an overall positive trend for the team. And I think that's, ultimately what you guys are hoping to accomplish. And so, if anybody has questions, I'd love to take those now. If there's anything else specifically that somebody would like me to address, I'd be happy to talk about that too. Whether it's at-home training, like I said, I know I didn't talk a ton about strength and conditioning specific stuff. So if somebody has a question about that, I'd love to answer that too.
Thanks very much, Will. Yeah, guys, the floor's open. Let's pick Will's brain.
Okay, well, Willie here. Okay, at home training, we try to tell the guys to use what they've got. Okay, we've had a guy that showed them, if you don't have weights, you can take empty Coke bottles, or what's the name, put sand or water in, and put a rope around to train it. I can remember, and it's even on the shooting side, sometimes there's just to believe in their action, because sometimes a lot of the people, I believe, have got the wrong action, and they they don't try to improve it. Sometimes by showing them what to do, and they go home and they can go and do it. You used to say, see it and feel it. Okay, if they can do that. So I don't know how you guys on your side get the guys to fall into that thought, because a lot of the guys have got a lot of excuses by us for not training, and we trying to create a, a mindset. No matter what, it's like what you said is, there's no, if you don't have the equipment, there's a way to adapt. And I don't know if you guys from your side have maybe have got something that can we show them that you don't have to have a full gym to strengthen yourself. Simple exercises that can help you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I kind of talked about that briefly earlier, but when COVID shut everything down, that we, typically most of our kids have access to some type of weight room year round. But when COVID shut our program down, it basically shut the whole country down. None of our kids has access to a weight room. And so basically what we were doing is I put together an at-home packet and I sent that over. So, I mean, feel free to distribute that and show that as well. And you guys can use that as a template. But our at-home workout packet had no equipment in it at all. Like we didn't have dumbbells or barbells or weights or anything like that. And so, like I said earlier, we were using sandbags. We were using backpacks and duffel bags with books in them. We were using water jugs. We were using books. We were using whatever as weight, external load, resistance. We did a lot of changing up exercises with the tempo, whether that's an eccentric, like a slow lowering, a pause, an isometric movement, combining those two in some form. Like we were doing a ton of that kind of stuff to increase the intensity with simple body weight exercises. But you're absolutely right that you don't have to have an elaborate weight room or a lot of equipment to get better and to train. Especially if you've been inconsistent with your training in the past, you're going to benefit from doing pretty much anything, right? And so just being consistent with your training, you're going to see a ton of improvement there. But I think ultimately, one of the things, like you were saying, how to monitor that or how to, encourage that. Well, one thing I would say, the first thing, and I think this is the biggest portion of it, and I kind of talked to it about two different places here, but you got to be self-motivated as a player. You got to understand that your coach isn't always going to be there to tell you what to do. Your teammates aren't always going to be there to encourage you. But like I talked about earlier, no one cares about that. No one, it doesn't matter to any other national team program. It doesn't matter. They're not worried about what you're not able to do, because when they play you, they're going to try to beat you by 60 points if they can. Like, it just doesn't matter to them. If if you can make up excuses, that's fine. Like, hopefully that will console you when they beat you by 60 points. You know what I'm saying? Which it probably won't. But if you can clearly identify why you're doing what you're doing, like I said earlier, if it's just being a part of a team, then maybe you don't mind if you get beat by 60 points. But if you're wanting to be successful on the international stage, win championships, be competitive, compete against these bigger programs, compete for a medal in the Paralympics, whatever that looks like, then being inconsistent isn't an option. Making excuses for why you can't do stuff isn't an option. It wasn't an option for us when COVID shut everything down. I put these packets together that required no equipment. We did video calls just like this with all of our teammates, and we worked out on video just like this to make sure everybody was doing it, to make sure that the technique was right, to show them how we were modifying stuff. Like there was no excuse. We just had to figure out how we were going to do it. And, there's a quote, it's a really good quote that kind of drove what we were doing during that time. But I think it's applicable, to having a lack of space, having a lack of equipment. There's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, and it says, "The impediment to action becomes action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And so basically, it's when you have a problem, when you have something in your life that's making a situation more difficult than it needs to be, it really just becomes the answer, because you're going to figure out a way around it. And so, there's really nothing that, if you're motivated and you understand why you're doing what you're doing, there just shouldn't be excuses to do that. And so I think that's the biggest portion of it, Coach. I think another big portion of that too would be, as much as you guys are able, trying to do things like this with training specifically, to just hold people accountable, to make sure you're there, to make, to work on time management, to work on all of that type of stuff. And so whoever's leading your strength and conditioning, a chair skills workout, a shooting workout, or a ball handling workout, whatever that would look like get them on a Zoom call, demo the exercises. This is exactly what we did for about 4 months when everything was shut down here. But I would bring everybody on these calls. I would warm them up. I would do the workout with them, and then I would cool them down, and we would get off. And we would try to do that in a timely manner, like in 60 minutes. But that's, that was hopefully they were self-motivated enough to show up, and then we were kind of motivating them as much as we could and holding them accountable as much as possible. And then, if somebody wasn't there, we'd obviously check in on them, make sure they were okay, and see why they weren't there, and just encourage and facilitate that consistency from their end. I hope that answers your question. If not, please ask, whatever else you need.
Okay, I would say it's basically, it says no accountability to yourself, because
and your teammates.
And your teammates. You've got a commitment towards the team. Remember, we're selfless, like you said. We work for the team. If you don't work, you're not going to fit in.
Yeah. And just be creative with what you're doing. Like you said, like you may not have an elaborate weight room. You just might not have access to it, and that's just part of it. But again, filling up a bag with dirt's pretty cheap and pretty easy, and you can do that, and you would be surprised at how much external load you can get from that. And that's basically what we were doing. We were filling bags full of sand and just using them. And you can get a lot of good work out of that. And, like I said, books and things like that, just regular household items that have some weight to them. You can do a lot of good stuff with like shoulder prehab and rehab type work, which is going to be great for maintaining shoulder stability. You can do a ton of core work. You really don't need that much equipment to do core work anyway, but training your core, training your midline stability, how you move and rotate, that's nothing but beneficial for sport for sure. And so that's an easy thing you can train at home. Just doing body weight exercises are going to be really beneficial, because at the end of the day, when you're moving your chair, when you're playing in the sport of basketball, it's all body weight anyway. Like you're pushing your chair a little bit, but you're really just moving your body weight. And so the more proficient you can become at that, the better off you're going to be. And so, I think it's just be creative, keep it simple, but the consistency piece of that is just going to be absolutely critical.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, guys. Anybody else?
Jerry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Max.
Well, I actually think in this country, or even in Africa, it's actually a mindset and pride. We're just dealing with a different culture, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But it's a mindset and it's pride. Do you want to get into your national team? Are you going to be proud to wear that jersey? Mm-hmm. What are you going to do to actually wear that jersey?
Yeah.
So we've got to get around this mindset and start. Me as a coach, I don't do fitness at all. My attitude is you guys get yourself fit. I'll work on the skills and on the tactics. But I'm not getting you fit. It just takes up too much time on my camps, on my training sessions, and things of that nature.
Mm. So when you say it's a pride issue, are you saying that the individuals are too prideful to do that kind of stuff, or that there's a lack of pride in what they're doing?
It's a double-edged sword, yeah. There's lack of pride. We've always got excuses why we can't do things. We need to get around this mindset where we encourage the guys to do what they have to do, but you have to fight for that spot now. In the past, it was always entitlement. They were entitled to be in that position, on that team, etc., etc. It's not happening anymore. You're gonna have to work for that spot.
For sure. Yeah, I was actually about to say that. That's a good point. I think that you can't. If somebody thinks, if they're too proud to train hard and to work and to do what they need to do, even if they're the best player on your team, from an administrative standpoint, you just can't reward that, and I think that's exactly what you're saying, but you just can't, at the end of the day, and I think that comes down to, the identifying your why as an individual is important, but as a staff is also equally important. And so for us, a great example would be, in the collegiate division, we're working with 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old men and women. And our ultimate goal is, as fun as winning is, as much as that helps us out as a program, as much as we all love to win because most of our coaches were athletes. At the end of the day, our job is the development of young men and women and helping them become productive members of society and whatever they want to do moving forward. And so just like I told you, if you're not willing to do what you need to do, if you're not conducting yourself in the proper manner, even if you're the best player, we're not going to reward that. You may not play, you may not see the floor. Like I know our men's coach, a specific example would be our men's coach. He has a 0 tolerance policy for talking to the referees. And so like if a ref makes just an egregious, horribly bad call, nobody on the court can say a word. It doesn't matter. Like there's nothing you can do about it anyway. But like he just will not allow that to happen. And it doesn't matter who it is. If somebody says something and doesn't adhere to the rules and what's put in place, like they have to come off the court. He's going to take them off. And it doesn't matter if we're, down by 2 or up by 2 with a minute left and our best player has to come off the floor. It doesn't matter. Like that's the standard. That's what we're going to hold ourselves and our individuals accountable to. And there's no excuse to that. And so I think from an administrative standpoint, that's something to enforce. But then I also think that as a team, as a group of individuals representing your country, like, if there's a lack of pride in that, then maybe you just need to think about what your pride is as an individual, because I don't know a whole lot of people that are okay with just getting beat every time they play something or compete in something, and so like, if we're not doing what we need to do and we're not continually progressing and getting better, then, maybe the pride in my country may not be affected by that, but me as an individual, my pride would be hurt by that. I would be mad. I would be upset. Like I would not be okay losing every single time that I played. And I would be willing to do everything that I could between one competition and the next to make sure it doesn't happen again. And one year and the next to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I think at the same time, that comes down to, like I said, for the staff and administration, what is your why, but what is the team and the individual's why as well? Because, you have to, and you really have to work that out. Like it's something you have to think about. It's not just an automatic answer of like, this is why I'm doing it, right? Like it's not just it's not always that clear. Like it needs to be a well thought out, think it all the way through of why I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do. Why am I willing to sit on these calls? Why am I willing to go to these practices and go away from my family, go away from whatever it is for a week or whatever you guys are coming together for? Or why am I willing to travel halfway across the country just to get beat at a game of basketball? Like, why are you doing those things? And I don't think that's just because it's fun, because losing's not fun. And so I think if we encourage all of the guys and men and women associated with this program and on this team to think through that all the way through and identify what's truly motivating them, then they can start using that as a catalyst to try to move them forward and push them into what they're doing, because it's something you just have to think about every time, And so I think that's kind of what I would say in that regard, is not rewarding being too prideful to work hard, but then also trying to identify what's motivating you and what you are prideful about to motivate your development moving forward.
Well, I think a lot of our coaches now in the high development department is we're going to adopt this 0 tolerance. What was the word for it? Well, there's going to be 0 tolerance. If you don't fit in, it's sort of disappear, shoo. And it doesn't matter how qualified you are. If you're a senior player, you're the best player, we'll rather work with our juniors, develop them, and we're all on the same page. But the prima donnas and whatever, they think they're too big for the game, we'll soon weed them out. Yeah. But we have protocols which we're going to start working to now.
Yeah, and I think that's critical too for like a young program, or just changing the culture of a program, because I don't know what the culture of the program has been in the past and what they've gotten away with and whatnot. But, like once you identify your why, there are certain standards that you as a coach will identify, or you as a program will identify, maybe 2, 3, or 4 things that you just hold the line on, and there is no gray area with them. And you enforce that as much as you possibly can until you get the culture where you want. And, like I know one of the things we were talking about beforehand is just the being on time, right? Like making sure, like if our meeting was at 6 o'clock your time, like everybody should be on this call at 5:55. Everybody should be here, no questions. Like that should be, unless it was communicated beforehand, and that just being something that there's no excuse for. There's no, like you hold the line on that, because that's something, that's a skill set that's pervasive and important throughout your entire life. Like being on time for jobs, being on time for appointments, being on time for whatever, like that's just a critical component. And so that's not only a sports skill, but that's a life skill as well. And so I think that's a big portion of that too, is like changing the culture. You're going to have to, hurt some feelings and things like that to get the culture where you need it to be, but it's a critical component. And I think, speaking to the players now, I think you have to understand as a player, and this is something that we struggle with here too, and we have people that come from all over the country to play for us. But when your coach, and this comes from developing a relationship with your coach, but if your coach is telling you something even if it's aggressive or even if they're mad about something or something happened, like you have to understand as an individual that they're coming from a place of love ultimately. Like I know like I said, we have 30 kids in our program and I love each one of those kids. And I want to make sure that they're becoming the best individual that they possibly can. And that is exactly why I get so frustrated when they don't do what they need to do, because I love them. It's no different than my family. Like I would get frustrated with my son or my daughter when they're not doing what they need to do, because I love them and I know how important it is. And so as a player, even if your coach tells you something that you don't like, you don't agree with, you don't whatever, like you kind of have to detach yourself from that situation, remove your emotions from it and be like, okay, why would he have said that? Even if you don't think it's right, why would he have said that to me? Like, I think your effort's terrible. Well, if you as a person feel like your effort's good, then you're like, well, what does coach see that I don't see to where he would think my effort is bad? Or if he's saying that you're not consistent, well, what has led him to make that statement? For most of the they won't just say stuff like that to you just because they don't like you. You know what I mean? Like it's not like I would never just say that to somebody. And so, I think that's a portion of it too, as an athlete, is being able and willing to receive that critical feedback from the coach and know that you're coming from a space of trying to make the program as best as it can possibly be and truly caring about everyone on this call. And I think that goes back to the selfless component is like, like we talked about this the other day, and one of my coaches and I were discussing this. Probably the best player that our program has ever had. We've had some issues with him of recent, and there's some things that have been going on. But we ultimately came to the conclusion of we can't allow one person to take priority over 11 others. Like we can't allow him to be a priority over the 11 other teammates that he has, and that kind of ultimately drove what our decision was. And it's the same with this team. Like one piece does not outweigh the whole. One piece of this team does not outweigh you're representing your country, you're representing your people that are a part of that country or the team or whatever. And so I think that's all pieces that play into that. And something else, I mean, unfortunately, it's a very painful process. It's a very longitudinal process. It'll take a lot of time, but it's something I think is critical for developing the proper culture of the team.
Thanks there, Will. Luke, go ahead and ask your question. I don't feel like reading your chat.
Okay. How's it? So, how could we as players identify a specific place to start improving? Like,
I think I think it depends on what aspect you're talking about. And so I think if you're talking about sport itself, maybe getting feedback from your coach is obviously a good place to start. So like if you guys centralize for a camp and you go over some stuff, hopefully your coach will give you items or an itemized list of like, hey man, these are the things that you need to improve upon before you return next time or while you're at home in your free time. And I also think too, so that's one portion of it, is getting feedback from your coaches and your teammates. That would be another part of that too, is just like, what do they think you need to work on, and then go over that and see. And I think also just being honest with yourself as an individual of what are things that you think you struggle with. And that may be, if it's basketball specific, you may say like, well, I'm not very good at transitioning on possessions. Like I'm kind of slow getting back and forth. So maybe your speed is a portion of that, or your endurance is a portion of that. Or maybe your percentage finishing on layups is pretty bad on the right side, but on the left side you're doing well. Well, I would say like obviously you need to work on finishing layups on your right side. And so like going over things like that yourself would be a good way to self-identify those. Getting feedback from your coaches and teammates would be another. And so I think those are two good places to start. And then I also think like just evaluating yourself when you do physical activity or exercise or whatever, like, I mean, if I'm being completely honest with myself, like if I go for a run, if I go for a 2-mile run, when I'm done, I'm like, man, that was terrible. And so obviously for me, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at long distance running. And so that's something, as much as I don't like it and I'm bad at it, that I need to specifically work on because, just because for that reason that I don't like it and I'm not good at it. And so I think those are the two bigger components I would say would be, being open and willing to receive feedback from your coaches and teammates, and then being honest with yourself about things that you don't think you're good at. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thanks.
Okay. Anything other specific you want to ask about that, or was that good enough?
No, that was perfect. Thanks.
Perfect. Great.
Will, a question from Donnie. Donnie asks, what specifically can they do to improve on speed?
So to get faster, right, at sprinting, right, if that's what you're talking about, because when you say speed, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a top end sprint. To get better at that, you're going to have to do it more often. And I know that sounds like a very simple, maybe too simple answer, but to improve at sprinting, you have to sprint. Like that's just what you have to do. And so, knowing how sprinting works and how sprint mechanics work and things like that is basically, say you're trying to improve your 20-meter sprint, okay, or maybe your 10-meter sprint, whatever that would be. What I would do is I would mark off 10 meters. Okay, I would mark off 10 or 20 meters, whatever your length is that you're trying to improve upon. And then what you need to do is you would start, like if I was programming this for you to do, right? We're going to start off, and this would just be a part of your workout or something that you do in addition to another training session, because it's really not going to take that long. But mark off 20 meters, and then I would say, okay, I want you to push 20 meters as fast as you possibly can. And you would do it. You would sprint that 20 meters as fast as possible. And then you would rest it's about a 10-to-1 work to rest ratio. And so basically what you're trying to do is you have to fully recover. Okay. We're not working on endurance. You're working on speed. And so you have to fully recover. So if it took you 10 seconds to sprint 10 meters, then you're going to rest for 90 seconds. Does that make sense? Or 100 seconds, right? You're going to rest for a minute and a half until you're fully recovered. Once you have fully recovered, you would do it again. Okay. And again and again. And so basically you would do that process, and maybe you start at 6 sprints, and then you work up to 9 sprints, and then you work up to 12 sprints, right? So that volume increases as you go. You're getting more reps in. But then you're going to need to increase the intensity of that too. And so what you might do is you might push or run that same distance, okay? But maybe you add a little bit of weight to your chair, right? And so maybe you put, like we were talking about earlier, a sandbag on you or something that's going to weight your chair a little bit, and then you sprint it, because by adding a little bit more external load, you're going to make the intensity a lot higher. And it's kind of like, in baseball, they swing a weighted bat because it makes their bat speed quicker. And so when you're having to accelerate and push with heavier external load, when you remove that load, you're going to kind of overcompensate for it and actually push a little bit quicker, if that makes sense. But I would say the biggest portion of that would be figure out what you want to try to improve your speed on. Do it as much as you can, as hard as you possibly can, like max effort, and then rest 100%, like recovered between reps. And that's how you're really going to work on speed or agility. Really, they're pretty similar, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question? Perfect.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, perfect. All right, guys, any other questions for Will? Don't be shy.
Well, I think what it is, it's a combination of everything. First of all, you've got to get your body conditioned before you start getting into all these sprints and things of that nature. So, they've got to work on their upper body strengths, their arm strengths, the hand strengths, mid-body, in some cases, the legs. They start working on that. Then we start working on the other skills, i.e. speed, stamina, etc., etc. But they need to work on all their body skills first.
Sure.
Before they start trying to get into all these sprints and get themselves fit. Otherwise, they're just going to create injuries.
Yeah, exactly. And then, taking that a step further into like sport too, like if you're out of shape, if you're detrained, if you're not healthy, then when you go to camp or when you centralize for a training camp or whatever that would look like, then your deconditioning is going to limit what you're actually able to do at camp anyway, right? Like your training sessions are going to be altered if the team comes in and we're really out of shape, or if we come in and we're really in shape. And so, a lot of that comes back to too, like, what are you trying to get out of those sessions? If you want camp to be the best that it can possibly be, then we all need to show up in shape. Otherwise, I know you said you don't like to do this, but then otherwise you really have to spend camp trying to get people in shape, and you never get to work on anything basketball specific. And so like, that's not good either, because we're ultimately trying to play basketball. And so, you gotta, I think, yeah, that's a perfect point. And I think, again, that plays into what we've talked about time and time again, but that consistency portion of it, right? Like you can't detrain every time you go home. Otherwise, we're never really making progress. We're just kind of going ups and down, like hills and valleys over the course of a year. Whereas if we can fight to maintain what we're doing, fight to improve a little bit when we go home, ultimately we're gonna increase over time.
Billy had a question.
Well, we used to believe the first 2 pushes in a wheelchair, we used to call them power pushes. Need to get the guy up to speed and that. Are we wrong thinking about like that or not?
The first 2 pushes being the most important portion of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty consistent thought process throughout every program that I've talked about. And so, you see a lot of these other international programs, like they'll do, say they're testing speed, they'll do like a 20-meter sprint, but they always look at like the first 2 meters. And that's like your first 2 pushes. And that's like one of the big like pieces that correlates to the sprint itself. And so, no, that's definitely a huge portion of it is like the first 2 pushes are going to be really important to you getting up to a top speed so that you can maintain that sprint. So no, you're not wrong in that thought process. But I think it seems like from what we've kind of talked about today, I think there's other things that we would need to prioritize over that, right? And so before we start worrying about sprint mechanics so much, like we need to just get in shape in general. You know what I mean? Like we need to work on our work capacity. And so like doing some aerobic conditioning type stuff to get where we can start working on that stuff, and then worry about the technical portion of like where their hand placement is for a push, how their first 2 pushes look going into it. But I think there's, some bigger items to worry about beforehand, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you. Get the basics right, and then you go to the next level of what to become effective. Because if I listen to the question about speed, get your body condition correct and get everything else in place. Then you can work on the next level to help them to get better, to accelerate quicker, and to be more effective.
That's right. Yeah, you gotta, just like with anything else, you gotta start with the foundation and build up from there. And having that aerobic base is going to be one, having that endurance is going to be a big portion of that. Making sure that you're just in shape in general is going to be important. And then kind of going back to what Max alluded to earlier, making sure that you are strong, you can control your body, you're stable enough to where you're injury free. You don't have things like that are persisting and inhibiting you from being able to train.
Thank you.
And obviously included in that is eating correctly, making sure that you're fueling your body for the workouts.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Miska.
Good day. I just want to let you know, man. First of all, the coaches really have to also put the effort in. Yes, they're all talking about, yes, we have to do this, that. Players is not performing. Like Will was saying now, what's happening? We need to have a Zoom meeting like this every day. This has to take place, and we have to set out a time when we're going to do stuff. Yes, today I tell myself I'm going to train. Tomorrow, then I don't train. The following day, I say, no, man, I'm getting too tired, or that is paining. I don't have that confidence to train because, we lost a lot. It was COVID. We lost it, we see each other. It was a lot, man, that took time. So it's like now for me, I'm talking about my own experience now. Don't get me wrong, guys. But for me, is it like, it's so hard to train. So I will train like on a Monday, then I'll tell myself next Monday I'll train. And it's bad for me because now when we're going to come to a training camp, it's going to be so embarrassing, not only for me, but for everybody's going to feel odd because nobody's on that same level. So I will suggest the coaches himself, we have to have a group, or we have to put a video every day out what we're going to do. Go on the floor, we're going to do that. If that people is not attending at that certain time, we have to my part, SA is down there. It's like myself now. I had a baby and everything. I'm totally out of the team already. But for me, it's like I think to myself, no, I was that time twice. So for me, I'm still on that level. But believe me, I'm so unfit. It's unreal. You just won't believe it. And it's like I'm telling myself, I'm going to waste my time when I'm going to come there. And I'm going to waste everybody's time. I'm going to waste your time also for sending me over for a training camp and all that. So I really want to get fit. But today I'm on, tomorrow I'm off. Yes, I know it depends on me. It plays a big role on me. But I don't have that motivation 100% yet. So what do we do now forward to have that motivation? Because I'm going to waste your time. That's what I can tell you now, guys. I am going to waste your time. I am here every week in a Zoom meeting. We just talking, but from we have it a month ago already, nothing took place. We didn't put a strategy out even to say, we're going to do this. We're going to, guys, did you do this today? Did you do that? And that is just my opinion to the whole thing. And for me, being all the years already as a player, It's always before a few months before the time we're gonna go overseas. We only come together, and it's embarrassing when we go over to the next country and we play like the man is saying that we lose almost by 60 points, and that is what happened. Why? Because we're so unfit. We don't have a real strategy where we tell ourselves, look, this is what we're gonna do every day. And if that person is not online or what, let that person do a video and send it through. Then we know that person did do that day 1, day 2. We must have a timetable put it out for us. That is my.
Thank you, thank you for that, Miska. But yes, definitely, I think this is the purpose of what we're doing with this with these Zoom series. And you know, as I say, in a couple of weeks' time, the series is over, and the coaching staff will then start doing the Zoom meetings with each of the teams individually. And also, guys, I'll just come in here quickly to say that from next month we will be doing regional, you know, on-court practical camps, which we're just trying to work out the logistics, obviously COVID related. So thank you for that, Mishka. I'm glad to see you so passionate about it, and let's keep that motivation there. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Will?
Yeah, what I was going to say, and again, obviously there may be limitations to this, but you know, I think that you have the right mindset in what you were asking. Like, I think that, you know, you understand, like, you don't want to lose. You don't want to be embarrassed when you go somewhere. You want to represent the team the right way. You want to represent yourself the right way. And you know, how do you maintain that motivation? Well, you know, I think that trying to avoid getting beat by 60, like you said, is motivation, right? That's motivating you. I think that it's going to be something that drives you to train consistently as you possibly can. And so I think that that's good. But I think another portion of that too is, you know, you were saying, I think that, you know, the coaches need to set up meetings for us. I think that we need to do this stuff more frequently to help people, hold people accountable and stuff like that. And I think you're 100% correct. But I also think that, you know, that's a great idea. That's a great thing to encourage and to put out there. And hopefully the coaches will move forward with that and try to facilitate that as much as they can. But, you know, as an individual, you can't be afraid to try to take ownership and leadership of that and do it yourself. Because ultimately, you know, if you have the availability or the access to be able to do it, I hope you do, being on here, but, you know, like, you know, there's nothing that says that you can't have a meeting and say, like, you know, and check in with people, or, you know, if you put together a workout, or if someone put together a workout that has worked really well, or whatever that might be like, hey, we're doing a Zoom call at this time, we're jumping on, we're doing the workout, like, everybody needs to be there, blah, blah, blah. Now, you can't control how that's going to be received, but you can take ownership of that, and really you only control you anyway, right? And so, you know, encourage the coaches to do that, bring it up, keep bringing it up, you know, try to, you know, pester them about it, annoy them about it if you really think there's value in that, until hopefully it'll get moving forward. But also, again, don't hesitate to do it yourself. Don't hesitate to take ownership of that. You know, that kind of goes back to the selflessness piece of it. And I'm not saying that you're selfish, but when I was talking about those players that I've had that are selfless, you know, if you're training, it's not just enough that you're training, but you need to try to encourage your teammates to train with you. And maybe that's via Zoom. Maybe that's just contacting them somehow, dropping them a message and being like, hey, make sure you're training this week. Make sure you get 2 training sessions in, 3 training sessions in this week, and trying to bring them along. Because I think, like I said, the motivation portion of it is there, but I think that you as a player need to take ownership and try to be a leader and get other people to buy in that with you. Does that make sense?
I think
Totally agree, Will. Totally agree, Will.
Sorry, Vili. I think also, guys, just bear in mind, I mean, we've got Letabo and Natemba on this call, and they did spend quite a bit of time putting together videos on certain exercises that you guys can be doing. So whilst, yes, maybe the coaches haven't done a daily follow-up with you guys, you have you know, Letabo and Natemba, and I know they're still working on putting all of the videos together for you guys. So, you know, pretty soon we'll have a library of different exercises that you can do. And yes, I think following it up with the coaching staff will, you know, to have regular sessions with you to make sure that it's getting done. And it's encouraging to see that you as players are seeing the importance of that. So yeah, just you know, I think everything that Will has been talking about, Letabo and Natemba have already been working on, and, you know, in the same principle, we've already got these things started and in place. So just bear that in mind.
And I think, going back to the other point that I brought up, going back to the question we just asked too, is, keeping it simple. We talked about that, like being creative, but keeping it simple. But if what he's saying, is true and you guys have access to a video library or just some exercises, like you don't have to make it up, or you don't have to try to reinvent something elaborate to make it a good training session. Like take what they're already providing with you, but add that accountability piece by saying, I'm going to do a Zoom call and you need to be on there, and just try to encourage that and facilitate it. And if there's value in that, which there will be, more and more people are going to start buying into it, and hopefully buying into the program. And if they don't, then you kind of know where they're at anyway, you know what I'm saying? Or that would be, if half the team shows up and half of them don't, maybe try to follow up with the other half and be like, hey, why weren't you on there? Did you do it by yourself, kind of thing? But I think, ultimately all of that to say that I think that just take ownership of it from your end as well. Because like I said, the only person that you have control over is yourself. And if you can start doing that stuff and pushing it forward, if there's value in it, which there will be, there's going to be more and more buy-in as you move forward.
Yeah, and I think just a follow up on what Will's just said. I mean, week in, week out, the same names that you see listed on as being involved are the ones that are online. There are players that are just not attending, but believe me, we're noticing that the coaching staff have noticed that, and those players aren't going to be moving forward with us. So I think the fact that you guys are on here shows your commitment, shows your dedication, and guys, again, we're as a high performance department are also sort of re-looking at things. We haven't done things 100% correctly over the years, and we're trying to grow as well. So I think that was the purpose of these Zoom webinars, talking to people from around the world, saying, what are you guys doing? And as I said, thank you to Will for being willing to give us his time and expertise. And yeah, as you know, next week we've got one of the coaches from Great Britain talking to us, and we've got Trooper Johnson, we've got Haj Banya doing this. So I think as soon as we're done with the webinar series, all of you guys will have a better, clearer understanding of what it takes. I've also got Terry Bywater and Greg Warbot, and some of the Great Britain players are also going to come in and chat to us about what it takes to become a champion. So all of this is part of the program, and from this we then move into the practical implementation of what you guys are learning. But yes, quite right, Mishka. You don't have to sit back and wait for another month before you start doing the exercise. Get out there and get it done.
For sure. And then Willie, I know you have a question, but Susan asked one in the chat a little bit ago, talking about fear of being on court. I think that if you have a player that is timid when you get to competition or on court, I think that the longer that they're being a part of a high performance team and practicing things like that fear will subside. Like, I think it's just a repetition thing where you have to, you have to be there, you have to fight through the adrenaline, you have to understand the pace, you have to do all that kind of stuff. It's no different than when we bring in new players each year. We have freshmen that come in, they're playing with guys that are older than them, that are bigger than them, that have been in this program for longer, that are playing at an international level, like really good players. And so there's a piece of that with them as well. And so there is that fear coming out there. But again, the repetition portion of it will help. So the longer they're a part of it, the more that will kind of subside, like I said. But then I think another portion that plays into that, and it really ties into everything we've been talking about, is some of that fear will also be alleviated if you know that you're prepared for what you're doing. And so, like, if you have failed to prepare to go to camp or to be on court or things like that, like, you may be timid because you don't know how well you're going to perform or how you're going to stack up against other players or any of that kind of stuff. And so, like, that's some fear that's going to play into that maybe you could have had control over as a player, but you didn't prepare like you should. And so now that it's kind of coming back around and it's kind of wearing on you. And so I think, I think also that's something that if that, maybe that's a personal fear and it hasn't been radiated outward and your coaches may not notice it. And, maybe that's good. And you can kind of work on things to get it taken care of in that regard. But, if it's something that the coaches notice and they see that timidness coming out on court and they can identify that, I think just getting positive feedback from them and your teammates will also be helpful. You know what I mean? Like if they have confidence in you, that will help you in turn build confidence in yourself. And then it'll just get better and better moving forward. And hopefully when you have like a good camp, that will lead motivation to you leaving, better preparing for the next one, coming back in more confident, better prepared. And then eventually that fear just won't be a factor. So I think it's just a repetitiveness portion and making sure you're preparing and then getting positive feedback once the other two things have been put together.
Willie?
Jerry, just I say thank you to Will.
Yep.
He touched bases on things like the foundation of you start from the foundation and you build up. A lot of it's a lot of self-discipline that the players must understand. You must do something yourself also, and if you don't do it, don't expect to get better. Don't put the blame on other external factors. You have to look at yourself and what you can do to become better. And if the players have an international experience, I see how the people play overseas. And now you must put in your mind, what can I do to get to that level? Is my coach going to help me, or am I going to help myself? If I don't know what to do, who do I ask? If you don't ask a question, nobody can help you.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, you know, and I kind of alluded to this earlier when Luke asked his question, but, you know, big portion of that too is just being honest with yourself about what truly needs to be focused on with your improvement. And so it's very easy. It's easy for everybody, myself included, to want to focus on working on things that you're good at. You know, like if I'm a good shooter, I'm going to want to shoot all the time because it's good. I'm good at it, you know, whatever. Like, so it's easy to work on things that you're already pretty proficient and pretty good at. But like I told Luke, you know, if you're honest with yourself and you go over yourself with, you know, like I said earlier, with the fine tooth comb, it's easy to see things that you could work on. And that may be things like, you know, time management, being more self-disciplined, watching what you eat, being more consistent with your training. Like we talked about earlier, like those are some pretty glaring things that you could probably identify very quickly. Like it wouldn't take you very long to think of something you could do better. And so I think that that's something you have to be honest with yourself about. And then also being honest and willing to dedicate time to work on things you're not good at. Because like I said, it's not fun. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be hard to get motivated for that kind of stuff. But ultimately, that's where you're going to see the most benefit, is by trying to close those very noticeable large gaps of things that you're struggling with. And then once, like we talked about, you've built that foundation, you've closed some of those gaps in, now we can start working on more specific things or more sports specific things or things that you enjoy doing or whatever, like really trying to hone skills in. But focusing on 1% is all for nothing if you're missing the other 99%. You know what I'm saying? And so trying to focus on one thing that I'm decent at isn't going to help me at all if there's 75% of something I could close somewhere else. You know, like if my shooting percentage went from 70% to 75%, yeah, but you still can't push for 40 minutes, so it's useless. You know what I'm saying? So I think, again, prioritizing what's really important and focusing on the bigger gaps in your game and in yourself as an individual would be the key component to that.
All right, guys. Any other last questions? I'm sure Will would like to spend some time with his family this Sunday. But yes, if there's any last questions, let's quickly ask them. Yeah, go ahead, Max.
You know, it's discipline, guys. And like we've spoken about earlier on, it's a mindset and selflessness. And if you want to start with discipline, get up in the mornings and make your bed for a start. And discipline yourself to go out and do your training. I don't really think you need anybody to hold your hand. And if you want to lie about it, you don't lie to anybody else except yourself. So again, it's commitment from your side, it's discipline from your side. So all we can do as coaches is point you in the right direction and help you with the exercises, how to actually conduct the exercises, but you need to put in the personal work and do it yourself. I can't be there 5 o'clock in the morning to help you, or 7 o'clock at night to help you, because I've got 26 guys on my squad and I can't give them all personalized attention. But as a group, as a collective, I can. So guys, get up in the morning, make your bed. That's where your discipline starts. And then from there, discipline yourself to do whatever you need to do to get yourself through the day.
Exactly. Just to say again, Letabo and Notemba have spent a lot of time putting video clips together. I know they're still busy with some of the stuff, and those will be shared with you guys. So if you have questions about it, you know what you do: film you, get somebody to film you doing the exercises, send them through, and we can check if you are doing the exercises correctly, and Letabo and Notemba can correct you. Letabo, Notemba, do you want to add anything in here?
Hi, James. Oh, go on, Timber.
No, actually, basically what Vili was saying is as much as we can provide you guys with all the information that you need, they actually need to follow through with it. And we are available for any questions anytime. And sorry, I think the suggestion that you made, that if they want to send us videos just to see what they can do correctly or what to add on or how to progress, then that could work on an individual basis.
Okay, I'll give you a voice arrest there. Notemba, I can hear you struggling here. Letabo?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Notemba said, we're always available to everybody. And just from Mishka's passionate speech, Mishka, trust me, I have made tons and tons of exercise programs and videos. Unfortunately, I haven't been part of the women's team as much as I've been part of the men's team. But again, now you have access to me. But I've done tons and tons of that. It's all about, at the end of the day, the ownership. I can take you to the river to drink, but I can't force you to drink at the end of the day. But yes, if you'd like us to be on Zoom call, you want to send us a message, you have our numbers. We're always available. We're happy to help.
Awesome. Okay, so guys, any last questions for Will so that he can carry on with his day and we can all go to bed?
I have a million questions.
Okay, Donnie, go ahead, ask your question.
No, I'm just joking. I just want to say thanks, Will. What you said meant a lot to me as a player, and I think I'll put that to practice. And what Billy also mentioned and Max mentioned, it's all about self-discipline, and they can't always be with our players, so it's our responsibility to keep ourselves strong. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Perfect. Yes, sir. Yep, I was happy to be here, man. Glad to help you guys out as much as I can.
Thanks, man.
No, thanks, Will.
Yes,
Right.
Thank you, Will.
Okay, again, Will, thank you very much for giving us your time. I would like to maybe connect you and Letabo and Notemba to maybe communicate and compare notes if you're okay with that. And
That'd be great.
Awesome, yeah. And then we can just as I said, compare notes and hopefully get our guys fit and as you said, competing again. So yeah, that's the plan.
Perfect.